and welcome back to Live Well with Nicola. I hope you're all doing well. In today's video I just want to go through a little bit about the basics, science-based though, of how to build muscle, otherwise known as muscle hypertrophy. So I think the first thing we need to discuss is why is it beneficial to build muscle? I mean, if you're not kind of looking to compete in bodybuilding, or you're not a guy who wants to become super dense or something, why should you be building muscle? And the truth is that building muscle is so beneficial for everyone, young, old, athletic, not athletic, regardless of how you wish to look, for a multitude of reasons. So one of the benefits of building muscle is that because it has such high levels of respiration, it actually burns a lot more energy than fat does. And this means that the more muscle you have on your body, the more energy you're consuming all day long. So that means whether you're at the gym or literally when you're just resting. So that means you literally can be sitting on your couch and burning a lot more calories than you would otherwise, which means you can eat a lot more of your favourite foods and makes it a lot easier while dieting. And not only does it burn more energy, but because muscle is denser than fat, it means that the more muscle you have, the more you'll weigh while actually looking smaller and leaner. And the more you weigh, the more calories your body burns, which, you know it, the more food you can eat, including tasty treats. So firstly, building muscle is really the only way to change the shape of your body and kind of tone it in the way that you want. So contrary to kind of popular opinion, or maybe what marketing leads us to believe, you can't actually spot reduce fat. So you can't target fat loss in specific places like your legs or your arms if you want to have more defined legs or arms. The only way to change the proportions of your body is through building muscle in specific areas. And so the basic principles and the basic science behind building muscle is exactly the same, regardless of whether you want to build your chest or you want to build your bum or you want to get more pronounced abs. So it all follows the same principles. After that, it's just a case of which exercises should I choose to target certain areas more. And also another thing I want to mention is that it's very difficult to kind of become bulky just from going in a period of a few years or even a few months where you decide to dedicate the time to building a baseline of muscle, because muscle growth happens extremely slowly, and people who do kind of look bulky, firstly they have great genetics, they've dedicated their whole lives, hours of training and really kind of restrictive nutrition to meet their goal. And also a lot of the times it's not natural, and let's face it, they are taking extra substances which are giving them that very bulked up look. But if you lift weights 2 or 3 times a week in the gym, that won't happen to you, trust me. If it was that easy, I'm sure there would be a lot of guys out there who would be loving their really fit, bulked up bodies, so trust me, it's not. So how do you build muscle? Let's say you've decided you want to, how do you go about doing it in the gym? Well, the first thing I want to mention is that all these kind of, there's some misinformation out there in terms of, there's some workouts that might be touted on Instagram or online, such as high intensity interval training HIIT, Pilates, various different home workouts, kind of booty band kind of things. And these, I mean, I'm not trying to bash them because they can be really good for just getting active or kind of building some strength and muscle if you're at a total beginner level. But if you want to see significant changes in your body in terms of shaping your body and gaining muscle, these are not going to be effective. And hopefully once I've been through the principles of the science behind building muscle, you will also be able to understand why these workouts are not the most optimal tool for building muscle. So when we're talking about the principles behind muscle hypertrophy or building muscle, I like to split them up into 5 main principles that you need to remember and consider when you go to the gym. So the first one is the rep range. So what we mean by the rep range is how many repetitions or how many times we are completing a movement in each set, so each time we do it. And historically, the suggestion has been that for muscle hypertrophy, you want to be between 8 to 12 reps. So you want to be doing 10 reps of hip thrust, for example, each time you do the movement, so that you can build your glutes. But recently, actually, recent studies, such as the one I'm hopefully going to link here, have shown that there's a greater range of weights and repetitions which can stimulate muscle hypertrophy, and the recommendation is probably more around 5 to 30 reps. And This is great because it means that there's more variety in what we can train with depending on what suits you, but from kind of my personal practice, I found that it's probably best to stick between 6 to 12 reps, A, for maximum hypertrophy gains, B, just from time efficiency purposes, because if you're doing 30 reps each set, that's a lot of reps and that's a lot of time spent in the gym, and C, it also kind of pushes you more towards the strength side of reps, which would be, so we'd be looking at 1 to 5 to build strength, and so doing kind of 6 to 10 or even 12 will push you more towards that strength side, which is beneficial for kind of preventing injury and just making sure you're robust and you're not only building your muscles, you're also strengthening your bones and your tendons and so on. Right, so that's the first thing. We want to have a rep range between 5 and 30, but optimally probably between 6 and 12 for most people. So the second consideration is how many sets of these reps should we be doing per session, and what should our total training volume and frequency be over the week. So let me just distinguish first between training volume and training frequency. So training volume is the total number of sets and reps that you will do over a specified time, so let's say a week. Training frequency is the number of times you will train that muscle in that week. So for example, training volume might be that I'm going to do 20 sets of hip thrusts in a week, and training frequency might be that I'm going to split those up over 5 days. So I'm going to be targeting the glutes through hip thrusts 5 days per week. And again, I guess in a lot of kind of gym circles and kind of anecdotal evidence, people have often thought that training frequency matters a lot. Like, we just need to hammer down on one muscle. Like, if you want to grow your biceps, you should be doing bicep curls every day, you know? And recently research has shown that actually that's probably not the case, and that what they call the dose-response relationship is actually more so between training volume and muscle gain. So what I mean by that is that when you increase your overall training volume, so the overall number of sets and reps that you're doing in a week, you will see increasing levels of muscle gain. But it doesn't matter whether you do all those sets over kind of 2 days or over 4 days, you'll still get pretty much the same muscle gain. So I think that if there's a muscle group, for example the chest or the glutes, that you are really wanting to grow, then aiming for 10 to 12 sets of that per week is going to be a good place to start. So for example, you might be, okay, let's say you want to grow the glutes and you know that you want to aim for 10 sets of that. That means that you can then choose how to split that up over the week. So you might choose to do that over 3 days, which means that on one day you want to be doing 4 sets of 6 to 12 reps, and on the other days you want to be doing 3 sets of 6 to 12 reps. That will put you at 11 sets of 6 to 12 reps, which will be very beneficial for muscle hypertrophy. So we've talked about the rep range, we've talked about the total training volume. Now another thing to consider is how heavy should you be lifting. So this can also be referred to as intensity, and it's talking about just how much weight are you going to be lifting relative to your strength. So there's many different ways to measure this, so you might see kind of percentages, so you can find some online kind of documents or calculators online, which I will try to link up either in the video or in the description, where you can kind of figure it out as a percentage of your 1 rep max. But I find that oftentimes, especially if you're a beginner or intermediate, you won't know what your 1 rep max is. So if anyone doesn't know, 1 rep max is how much weight could you lift maximally. So, you know, kind of gun to your head, how much could you lift for just one time? And that's quite dangerous for kind of beginners or even intermediate people to be attempting. And also for some exercises like a bicep curl, it also doesn't necessarily make sense to be kind of lifting to your 1 repetition maximum. So therefore, what is often talked about in terms of intensity and muscle gain, muscle hypertrophy, is the number of reps you are from failure. So what is failure? Failure means, again, gun to your head, you couldn't do 1 more rep. So I've done 10 reps of bicep curls and I can't even bring my arm to do 1 more, even if, you know, I was literally, the whole world depended on it. So that's failure. And some people believe that for optimal muscle gain, you need to be training to failure. But personally, I think that if you're doing that for the average person who just wants to improve their body composition, if you're doing that every single time you train for every single exercise, it's just going to lead to psychological and also maybe physical burnout. And interestingly, recent studies show that training to failure versus not training to failure is not so important in terms of it doesn't optimize your muscle gain anymore to train to failure, as long as the volume is kept the same. And so, based on my own experience and this research, I kind of would recommend that most people, for most sets, they want to be trying to go between 1 to 3 reps of failure. So that means that you're doing a bicep curls, maybe you're at 8, you feel it's starting to get quite challenging, the last couple of reps were pretty challenging, you think, okay, maybe I got one more, and then you stop. So you want to feel like you could only do maybe a couple more reps, and the last reps you do want to feel challenging, otherwise you're not going to be making progress. So that might require a little trial and error, but you should be able to kind of, as you get more advanced, you should be able to know what feels like a couple reps from failure. One thing that I do want to mention though is that there is evidence that if you're kind of going for the strategy where you're using a lower weight for higher reps, so like we said, maybe 20, 25, 30 reps, because that, as I told you, has also been shown to be effective for muscle hypertrophy, there the research does say that it is more important to push towards failure rather than stopping short of failure. So it's just something to bear in mind depending on the strategy that you're taking. Right, so we've talked about the rep range, the training volume, and the intensity that you should go a little bit before failure. So the fourth thing to talk about is the exercise selection. What exercises should you choose in the gym to maximize muscle hypertrophy? So, like I said, of course, you want to take into account what muscles you want to grow, and you want to choose exercises that target those. And this is kind of outside the scope of this video because it would be, I don't know, 5 days long if I went through every single exercise that targets every single muscle, but you can find that information online. There's lots of sources. I'll probably make a few videos myself in the future. Next week I'm actually planning to release my top 5 exercises for growing the glutes, so definitely stay tuned for that if you like this video. But aside from choosing exercises smartly to target the areas you want to build, there's also kind of there's almost a small controversy between whether we should do what we call multi-joint movements or compound movements, where we're using multiple muscles and moving across multiple joints. So for example, something like a squat or a deadlift, versus isolated movements where we're really just only using 1, maybe 2 muscles, as something like a bicep curl, for example, or a tricep extension. And to be honest, in the research it shows that both multi-joint and single joint exercises, or what we call compound and isolated exercises, are effective for growing muscle. But I think for me the consideration is more that for the average person watching this who also wants to improve their cardiovascular health, wants to be time efficient, improve their body composition, maybe improve their strength a little bit, for kind of all-rounded health and athleticism, multi-joint exercises are shown to be slightly superior to single joint exercises, and personally it is 80-90% of what I do, since I only train a few hours per week. I feel like for me and my goals, which is more like all-round body composition, athleticness, health, it feels like a little bit of a waste of time to include single joint movements when multi-joint compound movements can elicit so much more kind of energy expenditure, like you burn a lot more calories doing them, and it's just kind of, I don't know, it's more challenging as well, so it's like you're getting a bigger bang for your buck, if that makes sense. You're working multiple muscles at once, you can do less exercises, you're expending more calories. It's just my preferred way to train, but single joint exercises are also, or isolated exercises we call them, are also effective if that's what you prefer, or you want to focus in a lot on one specific muscle group like the biceps or the hammies or something like that. Okay, so we've talked about rep range, training volume, intensity, and the exercise selection, and the final thing I want to mention in terms of the scientific exercise principles for muscle growth, and in my opinion what is the most important, is the concept of progressive overload. So progressive overload is essentially the concept by which you make the exercise a little bit harder each time. So what we mean by this is that you want to be increasing one variable and making it more difficult. So these variables can be how much weight you're lifting, how many repetitions you're doing at a certain weight, how many sets you're doing, how slow you're doing the movement, or what we also refer to as time under tension, how long it's taking you to complete the movement. The longer it takes you especially for extending the eccentric portion or the negative portion of the movement. In general, the more muscle growth you will see. And then there's also kind of more advanced training techniques like supersets, drop sets, cluster sets, trisets. Again, a little bit out of the context of this video because I'll probably do a whole separate video on those. But yeah, essentially you want to be increasing the difficulty each session by a little bit. And what this can look like, for example, is 1 week I might do 3 sets of 10 squats using a 30 kg kettlebell. Okay. And I start to feel that it feels pretty easy. So the next week I might do 3 sets of 12 reps using a 30 kg kettlebell. But then instead of increasing the reps, the next week I might want to increase the weight. So I'll stay with the same number of reps or even slightly decrease the reps, maybe go back to 3 sets of 10 reps, but this time I'll use a 32 kg kettlebell, and then I'll increase the reps and then the weight and so on and so forth. So when you're a beginner, you should be able to do this quite frequently. You should see that you're making significant jumps at each session, and you might even be able to increase the weight every session or every couple of sessions. And as you get more intermediate and advanced, that's obviously where the progress starts to slow down a little bit. It might not be linear, you might have peaks and troughs, but that's entirely normal, and that's when you might benefit from a coach or a program, or kind of manipulating small variables like rest times, or like the other things I mentioned, cluster sets, supersets, to continue making progress. But for the average person, what's important to remember is the concept of progressive overload, because at the end of the day, all those other things, they might seem kind of confusing, it's a bit overwhelming, you might not have each of them up to speed each time, and the best way I think to ensure that you're making progress is just to make sure that it's a little bit more difficult each session or every few sessions. And if you do that, I promise you that you should start seeing results. So yeah, those are the 5 principles of how to exercise to build muscle. So we went through the rep range. You want to be between 5 and 30, but probably optimally 6 to 12. The total training volume, so for something that you really want to grow, an area that you really want to grow, you want to be aiming for 10 plus sets per week. And for the intensity, you want to be going 1 to 3 reps from failure. And if you're kind of pushing towards those higher reps, 20, 25, 30, you probably want to be going to failure. Exercise selection, kind of up to you. Any exercises, if you follow the other principles, will be effective, but compound multi-joint movements might be more effective for all-round health and performance. And lastly, make sure to progressively overload, just make it a little bit harder each time. So that kind of sums up the exercise portion. And next week I'm going to go more into some of the other principles for building muscle, so your diet, other factors like sleep, rest. Again, it will all be science-backed. I was going to do it all in one video, but it just turned out to be too long. So yeah, I'm just going to cut it in 2. So for now, bye. I hope everyone has a really nice week. Like this video if you found value in it, and please subscribe to my channel, or stay tuned at least for the next video, part 2 on the diet and sleep and rest and the principles behind building muscle. Thanks.